Hi, I'm Julie Ross.
And I'm Gregory Abbey.
And you're listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
Julie is a longtime parent educator and counselor.
And Greg is an actor, writer, and director, and more importantly, a parent just like you.
Through conversations covering a range of different topics, challenges, and roadblocks, we hope to give you a few of Julie's tools that might just help make parenting a little bit easier.
Look, nobody's perfect, and parenting is challenging, to say the least. With a few skills under our belts, though, we might just be able to be good enough parents and enjoy the journey and our children a little bit more in the process.
Hi, welcome back to the Parenting Horizons podcast. We're recording remote today. Julie, how you doing?
I'm doing good. Greg, how are you?
I'm great. Today we are going to be talking about sending your kid to college, applying for college, and not so much the kind of how-to, although we might touch on that a little bit. I think because of our show, we're going to kind of talk about how you can emotionally support your child through this process. And I'm very excited. We have a guest today, and I'm very excited about this because I have a 17-year-old daughter who's a senior. So we're literally in the thick of it. In fact, my wife was texting me today about all of the supplements and the this and the that, and it's kind of it's stressful. It's stressful for all of us, and so I'll be interested to hear, how you balance that as we go through it. So our guest today is Tracy Schaffzin, who is a school Did I get that right, Tracy?
Yes,
Schaffzin?
you did.
Thank you. Okay. Who is a school counselor at the Clinton School, which is a 6-12 school here in Manhattan. Tracy, so before we jump into the conversation, can you just talk a little bit about your journey, like how you got here and what you do exactly at the Clinton School?
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me today. Being a school counselor is actually my third profession. I graduated from college and worked for a design company and then decided I was unfulfilled. So I went back and got a master's in public health, and I worked in research and evaluation in HIV/AIDS and substance use. And I did it for a number of years and had 3 kids. And so after a while, I transitioned from working at an agency to doing a lot of consulting, and I got sort of lonely doing my, side gig, which was doing all these side jobs for different clients. And so I started volunteering at my children's middle school, and I started running parenting groups. And I would run these groups, and they'd be all thematic, and it would be about parents of, 4 parents of 6th and 7th graders mostly, sometimes 8th graders. And, the people in the groups would be like, oh, you should do this. Can you come to my house for lunch and, facilitate a group? So I sort of started just doing it. And then I realized that I really this is what I wanted to do. And I had always, when I was in public health, always wanted to work with adolescents and teenagers. And, life took me in different ways. So it was, really an opportunity for me to return to middle school and high school. And I went back, got a second master's. I was like, one of the oldest people in graduate school. If you've ever seen that like Robert De Niro movie of like The Intern, it was like me. But I interned at Clinton.
Oh, wow.
8 years ago when we were in the old building. We 7 years ago moved to 15th Street in a brand new building.
So you mean during your master's program, your internship as part of your program was to work at Clinton?
Yeah.
Wow.
So I worked at Clinton and in the middle school, because there was only a middle school at the time. And the school was transitioning to a new building. It was taking on an international baccalaureate curriculum, which was a big undertaking, and it was expanding from a 6-12 school. But when you do that, you just only add 1 grade at a time. So I just really kept, my principal probably was like, who is this woman? But I kept like sending him proposals of things to do for a high school. And finally he and the counselor at the time was like, she's really great. You should just hire her. You need a 9th grade counselor. Like, I can't do this myself. So he hired me.
Wow.
Within about a week, she quit because the commute was too much for her and she was sort of done. So, I had this unique opportunity that I was able to help create a counseling program for a high school from scratch. And that's been incredibly meaningful to me because as a parent of 3 kids, first of all, I was able to do all the stuff I would want for my own children that I felt like I never got.
Right.
And I was able to be really creative. And our principal,
Yep.
but he really never says no to things. Like he's always, I'll be like, I have an idea, let's do this. And he'll be like, sure, try it. And sometimes they were like real clunkers, but we've been able to develop a program that is not like a prescribed program and kids have to fit into it. Like we change our program, we change our school, we change our curriculum all the time to really be responsive to our students. So it's been especially great in terms of the college piece because I feel like we really imbue social emotional learning into even the college application process because it's like an incredibly stressful thing to do. And it's important for us that the kids really feel like they have somebody in their court that's not their parent because their parent is sort of freaking out,
So what part of so you're a counselor there. So obviously college is there a specific grade that you work in now is college obviously must just be a part of the work that you do at the school?
Right.
Now?
It's only part of it. And honestly, like everybody thinks our goal, like our end goal is college, but like our end goal is for our students to be great self-advocates and self-aware and happy kids. Like college is a piece of it, but like we work with our students from 9th through 12th grade. So how we work is we divide the class alphabetically between, we have a social worker and another counselor who works primarily with 9th grade. So, my colleague Tim and I work from 10th to 12th grade and we divide the class in twos. So we get to know the kids when they're younger. So when we're sitting down with them to college, for many of them, we've known them for quite a long time and we're better able to advise them in the process.
Yeah. So full disclosure, I'm very excited because Tracy has A's. So my youngest daughter, Sage, goes to Clinton, and you will be working with Sage, who's now a freshman. But I have my other daughter is a senior at the Beacon School here in the city. So she's going through the process. So let's talk about this a little bit because it's overwhelming. And I was kind of talking to you about talking points. And the first thing you wrote about was to let your children write their own stories about the college process. Don't try to recreate or rewrite yours. So what do you mean when you say that?
Well, I think that's really true with every transition that your child goes through, especially when it comes to some educational transition that, if you were miserable in middle school or you absolutely loved being on the basketball team in high school, like you can't expect that your child is going to either want to do what you did or that is going to be able to like right the wrongs that you experience. So that really goes through to college. Like just because you joined a fraternity or studied philosophy or had a part-time job and loved it and met your best friends in college, all of that kind of stuff doesn't mean that they're going to have the same experience. So it's a very fine line between, in my opinion, having this commonality and sharing your experience, but not imposing the experience on them. So I have a lot of students that will say to me, we'll go through college lists and they'll say, oh, my mom says I can't go there. Or my dad says like, oh, you don't want to go there. And first of all, like, okay, maybe the student will end up at that decision on their own, but your understanding of colleges 40 years ago or 35 years ago, schools are very different places. Your child is a different person than you are. And, sometimes you want to let them figure out what they like and dislike. Because, and that's something that I'm really focused on too, is really the process. That the process, yes, is totally stressful, but it also can be like a real opportunity for self-discovery. It can be great family bonding time, and it can be a lot of good stuff too. So I do think like let your child figure this out for themselves and share and be there to reflect and discuss, but not, you may feel like you want to tell them exactly what to do, but that's not always going to end up in the best place.
Yeah, and I guess it's the balance, and that's the balance we're trying to figure out. And I think in the dynamic in my marriage, I probably step back too much, and maybe my wife presses too much. I think we're both trying to figure that out. So I guess the question is, I mean, and maybe you answered it, but how do you find that balance? Because you do want to guide them too, right? At a certain point.
Yeah, I think you do. Well, particularly, it all depends on the child and the family, right? Like, I have some students who are so dialed in and so like obsessed with the whole college and have done like the whole college process and like has done some crazy research. And you just want, some of their parents just want to say like, okay, just like, it's okay. You don't have to freak out about it. And then there's some kids that are so disengaged with the process and you're like, hello, are you in there? Like, you need to like do something, like what's going to go on next year. So part of it depends on who your child is and where they are in the process. I mean, my go-to, and I just want to say this as a caveat as my own experience as a parent, like I have not done everything right. Like a lot of it is making mistakes and saying the wrong thing, but like recognizing that you always have an opportunity to sort of like set the reset button, and nothing is ever so awful that you can't like have a conversation and say, I told you this, but really I want to hear what you think. And I think that's the thing, is that listening and having conversations is the best advice I can give, as opposed to just you lecturing about what it was like when you went to college.
Julie, I want to hear any thoughts that have maybe come up for you. I mean, one that I think you'll probably speak to is that each child is different. So that approach is, will vary your approach. I did want to just share, because the thing you said about this family bonding, which I think is really can be a big piece of it. So I have our son is now at NYU Film School, but he and I took a trip out west to visit California schools together. And we had it was just the best time, staying in the hotel. He wanted to see UC, he's a film kid. So we went to USC and UCLA, and we took a trip up the coast to the sister schools, which he hated. But even that was kind of funny. But I just won't ever forget that trip for the two of us. And then we went to Boston. He didn't like that as much, but it was still just to have that time with him, because like so many parents, we have 3 kids. My wife and I both work. We're kind of crazy. It's crazed. And she and my daughter have been able to take a trip. And actually, my daughter and I it starts to blend together. We took a trip to Chicago this year, and we just don't get a lot of one-on-one time. And it was so fun. And I was kind of anxious about it a little bit, like, how is this going to be her? I mean, we've spent plenty of time together, but just the two of us and the college thing. And it was just wonderful, because not only did we go and see the campuses, but we went to the theater together, and, she had never been to Chicago, and it was just a really special time. So I'm really glad you brought that up. So, because I feel especially I guess maybe it's competitive everywhere, but I feel especially in New York City, it's so hyper focused on college and getting into college and getting into a good college, that I just kind of want to hit back on that piece that you mentioned, that if parents can maybe kind of hold on to those moments too. So I don't know, Julie, is there anything you wanted to add about what Tracy said so far?
Well, I mean, what I can say from kind of my experience working with parents in this age group is that, there seem to be kind of 2 types, if you wanted to put them into 2 different categories. One is the tiger mom parents who are like, my child will go to college and they will get into Yale, Harvard, the Ivies. And then there's the other type of parent who are actually concerned about the pressure that their child is putting on themselves. Because even if you're not the tiger parent in a situation, I do think that New York City in particular, and maybe the surrounding Northeast areas, have a hyper focus on the name of the college that the child goes to. And it's not necessarily parents, but I think there's a lot of back and forth talk amongst the kids themselves. Where are you applying? Where are you applying? So, one of the questions that I get from parents is, how can I calm my child down about this? How can I talk about not getting that a good college is a college that's the right fit for you, right? It's not the name. It's not the reputation. A good college is the right fit. And some kids aren't meant to go to college. Or at least, not right away. And that's okay too.
Tracy, what would you say, kind of speaking to that point, like a child that, I'm sure you've seen that's putting so much pressure on themselves about the process and getting in. How do you deal with kids like that? And you did talk about, it's not so much about where your child goes to college, but how do they go to college? Is that a piece of that?
That's what I really feel, is that there are over 4,000 amazing colleges in the United States. And I think, there's also the option, as you said, of taking a gap year, not going to college, doing other work-based, service-based things with your life, either forever or for a period of time. But I do think, I know a lot of people who've gone to very prestigious Ivy League colleges. Is their life better than other people who went to schools that were like easier to get into? No. So right. I always say it's really like, how are you going to do college? And that's when I see a lot of these kids who are like, I have students who are just obsessed with one school. But as it has gotten more competitive, I would say that the majority of my students say that they have a bunch of tippy-top schools. And that's what I really want to hear, because putting all your cards on one perfect school is like, it's silly. Like, it's just, we wouldn't gamble that way, especially when you're looking at the statistics of getting into some of these colleges. So I do think that they are aware of how competitive it is, and maybe they're holding themselves back. But I always say to them, it really is about what you're going to do there. Like, what did you do? Like, you fell in love with the school because did you go online for a couple of hours and do some research? Did you go to an information and a tour that's an hour and a half of your life? Like, it's all a leap of faith. So, but what doesn't change is you. So when you go to college, you can join lots of clubs. You can take amazing classes. You can go to professors' office hours. And, that's something at our school that we really encourage kids to go to teachers' office hours. And we want them to go to establish relationships and to get help with work. But we also want them to start practicing these social skills when they go to college, because that's where you get the most meaningful connections with professors, and they can become like mentors for the rest of your life. So I do think it is really important to think about like how you're going to experience college, and not like necessarily just where. Where is important, obviously, but it shouldn't be the only thing. And the other thing is that I feel is that we all, as in our New York City, our culture in the United States, we put so much pressure on kids about the college process, and we act like this is the most important decision of their life. Yeah. And yeah, it's probably one of the biggest decisions that they will have made in their 17 years previously, but there are so many more bigger decisions that they're going to make in their life. And this is actually a decision that you can change. Like, if you're unhappy at college, you can think about how you are there, and you can change roommates, you can change classes, you can change majors. There's so much change even staying at the college. And then transferring colleges is actually so much easier than applying to a freshman. No, you never want to say to your son or daughter, oh, you can transfer as a sophomore. It's so easy, because you think they're setting them up that they're not going to be happy the first time around. But the truth of the matter is you can change it. Like, when later in life, to change careers, move your apartment, it's a lot harder, a lot more expensive than So these are bigger decisions. So let's not make these kids be so freaked out about making the wrong decision. Like, this is just a decision, and let's see where it goes.
I like that.
Yeah, I do too. And that kind of speaks to kids that might be putting too much pressure on themselves. I think as you were talking, I started thinking about, and Julie, I'd like to get your take on this too. So Tracy, what do you do with kids that are really apathetic about the process and don't care and aren't invested, and maybe they want to go to college? Because I guess you would say, like, if the kid is expressing like, I don't want to do this, you got to, honor that as well. But what if you have a kid who does want to go to college but is like just not doing it? Like, what do you do with, I'm sure you have kids in that situation too.
There are students like that, but I do feel in most situations when kids are dragging their feet, there's a reason for it. And I think they're a little bit deer in the headlights, and they just don't know where to do how to do it. Like, and it's less about the process of applying. They just don't know where to begin. So, I try to sit down with students and like go on my computer, and I always tell them Google is my best friend. So like, I'm always Googling things, and I'm like, what do you want? And they're like, well, I want a large college in the Midwest where I can study film. And then I'm like, okay, let's Google it. Like, we can figure it out. Like, it's not, I think that there's also this feeling like there's some secrets in this college process. And what I try to really work with my students is that it's really all at your fingertips. Use the adults in your life. And it's not only me as their counselor or your parents, but also speak to your teachers. They all, to get teaching jobs, they had to go to college. So they went to places. Talk to your coaches, talk to people, and just hear about their experiences so you can like maybe get some ideas of which direction to go in.
Julia, do you ever struggle with that? A kid that's apathetic?
Yeah, I think sometimes, I think as Tracy said, it's a little bit deer in the headlights, like they don't know where to start. I think there's also, have you heard the expression, change is good, you go first?
No.
Okay. Change is good, you go first. Nobody really, most people don't really like change. And I think sometimes kids are afraid, this is all they've known. They've been on a regimented schedule. They've been told where to go to school for the most part. Maybe they had a little say in it when they went to high school or whatever. But for the most part, they've been told where to go. And now they're having to look at this and say, do I really want to grow up? It's a little scary. They don't necessarily want the change. I found that one of the things that can be helpful around that is to, and especially now that the pandemic's over, during the pandemic, it was just not easy. But, take them to colleges. Let them get a sense of what campus life is like, because that can get them charged up and interested if they're apathetic, or afraid of moving on. And generally, I kind of find like as freshmen, and Tracy, you can correct me if you see it differently, but, as freshmen, they're like not so concerned with the whole process because they're underclassmen. When they get to be sophomores, they're still underclassmen, but they're not the lowest on the totem pole anymore. And as sophomores, they have friends who are juniors, and the juniors are invested, or a lot of them in the college process, and the juniors have friends who are seniors. So there's this trickle down effect. So kind of by the end of sophomore year, kids generally their ears start perking up. That doesn't mean that they're not afraid. And, I think that they are, because they're constantly comparing themselves to each other. But some of the apathy seems to wane often the older that they get. Occasionally that doesn't happen, and again, I think it's like change is good, you go first kind of thing.
Right.
Well, also developmentally, they are changing a lot. And they're becoming, they have this real need for independence, which is developmentally completely appropriate. So the idea of going off to college, even though I agree with you, I think change is scary, and the prospect of independent living And look, I'm much older. I feel this way too. Like, it's so thrilling, but it's also very scary, you know?
Sure. Yeah, exactly.
But they do get ready for it because grow up. When they're little, they're just not on the radar. But, also like, in a high school, and I'm sure even from your own high school experiences, you remember it towards the end of the year, you've gone through, even as a freshman, all of a sudden you see these older people getting into colleges, and we have lots of celebratory events and graduation and all this stuff that they learn that there's sort of a process. But I do have some seniors that I have to sit down with and be like, okay, we're going to have I have like college clinics, and I'm like, you're going to come, and I have my principal like give me money for pizza, and I'm like, we're going to apply to college together, because like I want you to at least apply to like a local school or something, just to have the option. It doesn't mean you have to go to college, but at the end of the day, you can decide what you want to do.
So the visiting college thing seems, maybe that's just super obvious and everyone kind of knows that. But I mean, why is that important? Other than, like Julie said, you get a sense of it, and I'm assuming you encourage all your kids to do that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Julie made a point about the pandemic. It was a little bit different, but I do think that, yes, I love it when families and kids visit colleges and have their feet on the ground to see. It gives them an idea of what college is. But I also work in a public school, and I'm very aware that many families cannot take off time from work and go to travel to college. They can't afford the travel.
Sure.
So one of the very few silver linings of the pandemic was that colleges made their remote opportunities for engagement so much better. So it used to be like you would take these like weird virtual tours that was all like animated and really uninteresting, and they never really worked. But now they've made it that there's live online information sessions. There are opportunities to speak with professors, admissions officers, students. The tours are a little bit better. So there are opportunities. And now we're very happy because admissions officers are actually coming to us and visiting our school. They haven't in a couple of years. And for me, it is just so much better because our students are actually speaking to adults and not just like a box on a computer. And I think in terms of social skills, it's so important. So there's a lot of opportunities to do it. And I think colleges are aware that not all families have the ability to fly out. But it is great if you can. And even like, we tell our students, we'll take you to Brooklyn College. We'll take you around Fordham or Columbia, just so we can be local and walk around and see what college is all about.
Right. Well, I was going to say, going to visit college, you don't have to go visit the specific college you might be interested in. You can visit a type of college. What does it feel like to go to a campus-based college? So Columbia, for example, here in the city, that may not be where you want to go. It may be too far a reach academically, but you get a sense of what it's like to sit in the yard and what that feels like. What does it feel like to go to a city-based college like NYU, which just doesn't have a campus specifically? So there are, and I realize when we're talking further out into the United States, we're concentrated here, and we're actually kind of lucky in that respect that we have the opportunity to not pay tons of money to go visit a type of college. But even if you're in the Midwest or whatever, if there's a college nearby, if we're talking about just kind of generating interest in college life, to go and get the vibe of, these kids walking around on a campus and being like, talking to each other, and you see pairs of kids go by, I think that can do a lot to energize a kid who may be apathetic. And it doesn't mean, my kids went to public school here in New York City as well. We couldn't afford to fly all over the country. So we looked at the types of schools, and we did what we could close by. What does a school, in Brooklyn look like? What does a school in Manhattan look like? So I just think, getting that vibe. I appreciate, though, what Tracy's saying, because certainly, my kids are are long out of school. And that was all pre-pandemic. And really the tours available online back then were worse than pathetic. It just wasn't like you couldn't get a sense of it at all. So I'm really grateful to know that actually that's one good thing that came out of the pandemic is that schools picked up their game and have
Yeah.
these live sessions.
Yeah. They've really stepped it up online. I want to ask you about, it seems so hard, and I know it's not true. Every college is difficult to get in, but I can remember from my son just several years ago that the acceptance percentages are getting lower and lower and lower at a lot of universities. Is it because of the Common App has made it so easy for people to apply to? Because it seems so simple now to apply. I guess my question is, how much do you talk to your kids about that? Because, my daughter's applying to McGill. They just take grades. A lot of schools are not, and many schools, I would say tons now are test optional. So that's not a way to distinguish yourself necessarily, which actually is a good thing in many ways. But I don't know. And maybe sometimes I do it too much because my daughter is applying to sort of some top tier schools. And I'm like, I feel like her college counselor might even said to her, hey, yeah, I mean, it's almost like winning the lottery if you get in here because it's really impossible. Tracy, how much of that do you talk to the kids about, and how much should parents kind of reality test with them about it?
So there's a lot there.
Right.
I think that you're right that, in the last however long they've had the Common App, let's say 15 years or something, that contributed to more kids applying to colleges. I'm a little cynical about colleges themselves because I think they're contributing to the problem. Because I think a very because it is a money-making business, this
Right.
whole college application process. So if right now I think there's 20 spots on the Common App, if we reduce it to 15, and you couldn't apply to any more, that would help. But nobody's going to do that.
Right.
I do think that some colleges have also played with their admissions decisions. So there's some schools like Tulane and UVA, amazing schools, but they've added early decision in addition to early action. So now it's changed their game. Like early action used to be something that was you could get into these schools, but now since they have early decision, that's their institutional priority that they want to admit 2/3 of the class if they have ED1 and ED2.
Can I ask you why? I don't know. First of all, why does a school do that? And then my wife told me, who went to Barnard, she said that only 66% of the people that actually got accepted to Barnard went, which just felt really low to me. So, why does a school like UVA add an ED on top of the EA?
Well, ED means that it's binding. So
Right.
it actually improves their yield. So
Okay.
when you add ED1 or ED2, that yield is like a number that they treasure and value, and they want that to be better each year. So ED helps that. The other issue is test optional. Kids would not apply to some of the most competitive Ivies because of their scores. They just
Right,
weren't in
right.
the ballpark. Going test optional, that presents a problem. Some schools are going back to testing. I will say not most schools probably will never.
Go
But
back.
for some schools, the most competitive, it's not that they are test optional. I think they're very truthful about that. But when they see those scores and they look really good, it's like a shiny object. Are they going to not look at it? They do. So I think all of that has created to this competitiveness. Then you have a number of schools that are, their issue is housing. They would want to accept more students, but because they have a certain amount of beds, so they do different alternative admissions, like spend the first year in our Shanghai campus,
Right.
or go to Bilbao, or go to the USC has a program where you spend a year at the American school in Paris. And then if you have a certain GPA, you transfer in as a sophomore. So a lot of that is they know that there's going to be a certain amount of kids who are going to transfer, not come back, take a year off. And so they can promise or move off campus, and they'll be okay in terms of admission. So I think there's been a lot of ways that colleges have tried to admit more people, but then also tried to become more selective. In terms of my students, I always talk about them and their admissibility and then the chances of getting in, and try to really separate them.
What do you mean when you say that?
Well, when I look at a student's GPA and test scores, if they have them, their essay, I know the relationships they have with teachers, so I can make an assumption about their teacher recommendations, their extracurricular activities. And when they're a really strong student and like on the top of our in terms of their academic profile, they're really high achieving students, I can say you are admissible to Harvard. Like you have all the building blocks. Whether you get in, if you're applying regular decision, it's a 4% acceptance rate.
Right.
It means that 96% of kids get rejected. So it's not you. If you were just like competing against a normal group of people, yeah, you're good enough to get in. So I try to like separate their self-worth and say that this is just a competitive numbers game. And I really focus on kids. You can visit all of your reach schools and fall in love with them. But I really try to encourage kids to really invest the same energy in researching their targets and likelies. I always talk about likable likelies. Don't just apply to school and be like, yeah, I'm applying there, but I don't want to go. I'm like, then don't apply. Let's find a better school for you.
We've had a few of those where like, if you know you don't want to go here just because you think you can get in, let's take it off the list. Like we're applying to so many schools and it's so much work. I'm really glad you said that because we had a couple of those and my daughter was like, I don't want to go there, and I'm like, then let's likable. Yeah. I like that one. That's
likable. Like it. Then the other thing I always tell kids, is for some of their likelies, to really look deeply in those programs and look for things like honors colleges to apply into, really cool study abroad or research opportunities. Because, I have heard some data coming out of some schools, like University of Arizona has a high acceptance rate, but apparently the academic opportunities at that university, because it's so big, are pretty amazing. Now, you can stay by the pool and go join a fraternity and just have a big old time there. But you can also really be a student if you wanted to be. So to look for those, in your likelies, look at the honors college, look to see if there's any merit scholarships. Like money feels good when you're 17. To be offered money to go to a college, like nothing better.
Right.
So I do think look at those things if you feel like the acceptance rate is too high. Also, things change. Like some schools had a really high acceptance rate. Years ago when my son, who's now in medical school, was applying to college, like Tulane was pretty easy to get into, or it was reasonable to get into.
That's changed.
And now it's almost impossible. So it changes.
Right.
Mm-hmm. But I always say, you're going to be fine. You're going to go to college. Everything's going to be fine. I know you don't believe me, but when you graduate, you'll say you were right. So
I like that.
The last piece then, and you kind of already touched on a little bit. So why don't we wrap up with this, is that you've talked a little bit about how you feel it's okay and even important to talk to your kids about money and college. And just to, we haven't done that quite yet, but my wife and I have started to have, because we're at the point where our daughter's now put her list together and it's pretty set and we're going to start applying. And she definitely has a dream school, but she's also already talked about going to graduate school and wanting to go to graduate school. And so my wife and I have said well, first of all, and I think Julie would probably agree with this, that the parent always has to get clear about how they feel first. And I think my wife and I are figuring that out. Well, let's say she goes to the highest end, undergrad, and it blows it all. And do we share with her hey, if you're thinking about going to graduate school, we might be able to help with that, but not, I mean, I'm assuming, Tracy, your point of view is that these are the kinds of conversations you need to have with your kid. And then, Julie, I'd like to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, I mean, as adults, we're always like uncomfortable talking about sex and money, right? Like, those are the things we don't really talk about with our kids. But when it comes to college, not sex. Well, yeah, sex, you can, prepare them for college and make sure that they understand how to protect themselves. But in terms of money, I mean, I think what students don't understand is that when you do apply for financial aid, it's actually the student who's applying for financial aid, but using their family's income. And, there is a student debt crisis, and hopefully we are navigating a way to mitigate that right now. But this is a really big investment, the biggest investment that the parent and the student sometimes, unless you have older siblings, it's often the first time you're paying this amount of money. Mm-hmm. And if your child came to you and said, I want to buy a pair of headphones that's $1,000, like you'd obviously have a conversation about that. Or, a pair of shoes or whatever, like you'd have conversations about it. So I think we do need to look, students and families need to understand that colleges come in a lot of different prices, that you need to think about you as a family, how much you've saved, how many kids you have in your family. All colleges are required by law to have a net price calculator on their financial aid page. And so you as a family can sit down together, answer a few general questions about income, taxes, where you live, number of kids in college, and get a basic idea of what you're going to pay at each college. And that could be very different. And I think it's important to have the conversation with your child about what it is, and also to look at their long game, as you said, about grad school. I mean, there are some people who are very wise in the world. I don't know what they do, but they would say that you should invest your dollars in graduate school, because for life, you make the most connections, get the better jobs, and that undergrad, like in the end, it's about your experience, but the label matters less. Mm-hmm. Some people would disagree with that, but a lot of kids also don't know what they want to do. So it's just to have that conversation. And there's a lot of students who say, well, I'm going to take out loans. And I'm like, no, you don't want to do that. That's like, unless you're going to go and be like a corporate raider or something, like it's really hard to pay off those loans. You pay interest on those loans.
Julie, I'm assuming you're always advocating for conversation. So I'm assuming that's something you would say to communicate with your child about.
Yeah, I actually think that it can start way sooner than when you're talking about college. I think kids need to know about finances, how to manage money, how to budget money from a very young age. And I think that having conversations when they're younger about money, not in a burdensome way, and not telling them like what your mortgage is or your income is, right, as a family, but giving them some money that they need to manage from fairly young ages. I think that opens the door to having a comfort level to talk about this, so that when you get to the college age, and and obviously you can do this even if you are at the college age and miss the boat with the younger ages, saying, let's just sit down and take a look, because this college costs X, Y, or Z. It's important for parents to keep a calm tone of voice, so that it doesn't communicate to the child that this is a subject that is scary and off limits and that kind of thing. But to sit down and start those conversations. If you can do it when they're younger, if you're listening to this podcast and you've got a high school kid who's starting in high school or younger, I would say start now. Talk about how the cost of shampoo, talk about the cost of whatever extracurricular things are going on, and to make that easier. But then, you get to the college age, and you have to, I think you got to sit down and bite the bullet and not be afraid of it as the adult in the room.
Tracy, before we finish, I do want to ask you one more thing, because you mentioned something that I loved, and Julie talks about the idea of underreacting a lot as a parent in situations. And can you talk about this? I think this is great too, that your child might have some insane ideas about college and where they want to go and what they want to do. How should the parent how does the parent react? How do you advise the parent to react in those moments?
Well, my husband and I always talk about like just sometimes you got to smile and wave. Like you just really can't react. I know that your child they're going to bounce ideas off of you. Like you're their favorite sounding board. And that's great. If you have a child who's going to do that, like treasure that. It's the most awesome thing. But they may say crazy things like, I'm going to take a year off and be a stand-up comic when the least funny child in the world. Like they might say things like that. And
Tracy, I have to interject here. My son, when they were in high school, said, I'm not going to college. I said, no, what are you going to do? And they said, I'm going to ride the rails.
Okay.
Like a hobo. I said, really? That's interesting. I mean,
know.
Like you said, off the wall. I'm going to ride the rails. What
and sometimes it's just for reaction, and sometimes they just want to see if you're listening to them, honestly, because sometimes, we tune out a little bit. But,
Yes.
I do think that they do say these things, or they're like, maybe I'll just go to Japan and study. And it's like, what? What are you talking about? So, I mean, my recommendation is just try not to react, be calm and collected, listen, ask questions, and have them self-reflect by your questions, and then go in the other room and freak out with your partner, your husband, or your wife. Like, save it for later and be like, what were they thinking? Like, what is going on? Because they're going to do a lot of that. And because it's often, like, sometimes funny, you just, like, kids are the best and they're really funny. And then we as adults act stupid too and we're funny. So like a lot of it you just have to laugh about, because ultimately, I know there's so much pressure on families and parents to like this whole college thing is so stressful, but realize it's just because you love your child so much that you want them to have a good life and you want them to have a good experience as they leave home, because it's so stressful to say goodbye to them, that you want them to be okay on their own. And just know that if you give them that stuff all in high school, take those trips with them to visit colleges, or even just like some of my families, they have, they're like, we don't want to talk about it. My son never wants to talk about college. And I'll be like, why don't you reserve your son for an hour a day or an hour a week and say, okay, let's have popcorn and we'll just talk about it for 1 hour. Just give me 1 hour. Like kids will give you 1 hour. They're like fun. If you promise not to bother them the whole rest of the week and you put in a little food, they're perfectly happy to do it. So like try to just create those spaces to like enjoy the process, even though it's sometimes a little hard. You'll all get through it. I have I saw one of my students today, and he's going to visit with his mom to Carnegie Mellon, and then they're driving to Boston. And I was like, that's a lot of driving. And he goes, I love a road trip and I have my learner's permit. I'm getting in the car and I'm driving. And I was like, I love that. That's so cute.
I love that. I also think conversation is made easier if you engage in kind of parallel activities. So you're not sitting down looking at your child face to face and saying, so let's talk about college. But you're like on a hike or a bike ride or a walk or at going to the grocery store, so that you're doing something at the same time. I mean, the best place is if you have a car and, you've got a captive audience when they're in the car, and, and then they're more willing to listen. They don't feel quite as under the microscope. I think that makes them feel really uncomfortable if they feel like they're under the microscope, even if it's only for an hour. So if you can make it part of an activity, I think you're going to stand a better chance as well of getting them to talk.
I just want to add that I definitely, what's helped us, what Tracy mentioned, is giving our daughter some agency, who's actually been great. But when we're kind of chasing her and going, hey, we need to talk. Did you look at they're like, get the hell away from me. So, what we've done is said along those lines, like, is there a time today or tomorrow that we can set that makes sense for you. We can sit down for 30 minutes. And then it's great because we're giving her some agency over it. So I think that's really important. So we're going to end. We covered a ton of territory. I don't know. Is there one thing, like, parents have just listened to this whole conversation? If is there one main thing you want parents to take away? If there's one thing, that idea they could hold on to, you can have two if you want. But if there's one thing that you feel like, I wish parents hold on to this idea through this process, Tracy.
I think it's just realize, like, it's not about just college. It's preparing them to be independent. So everything that you think about and do, just don't focus on the college piece. Think about, like, all the other gifts that you're going to give them. The ability to make decisions on their own, the ability to, self-advocate, to communicate. You'll see them when you're visiting colleges ask admissions officers questions, and, like, sometimes you're like, wow, that was a good question. That was my kid. I'm really proud. So there's all this good stuff, but think about that process and the skills that they're developing and the self-awareness that they're developing. All of that, I think, is the really important thing. And also just teach your kid to do their own laundry before they go to college. That's big advice.
My 22-year-old just showed up today with his laundry. He goes to NYU, but it's our fault. It's our fault. It's
just
sad.
say, and Sage is going to be, I'm going to teach her laundry.
Please, okay? Tracy, start
I
now.
will. I'll take her on.
Okay. Well, thank you. This has been awesome. We really appreciate it and your time. And
My pleasure.
We're right in the thick of it, so we're going to get this episode out quick so everyone can hear it.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you, Tracy. Thanks for listening to the Parenting Horizons podcast.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please share with your family and friends. And if you'd like to hear more about Julie's work, join one of her parenting groups, or see about individual counseling, please visit parentinghorizons.com. Or you can email Julie at julie.ross@parentinghorizons.com.
See you next time.